Hi, I'm Brian, Service Manager at Whole Latte Love, and this week on Cribs, we're going through the Rocket Apartmento.
Really, Cribs?
Really, Cribs.
Okay.
Come on in. All right, so I'm going to start in the back, as we always do in this series. From the back here, you can see we still have this is what we call the Reservoir Insert, or Reservoir Holder, which is attached to the cup plate at the top. You can remove that by unscrewing 4 little Phillips head screws right here. 2 screws there, and that whole part would come off and leave that, or screw, and then there's 2 screws down at the bottom that you undo, and the whole thing just comes right off.
Hey, look at that, a copper boiler.
Yeah, look at that.
Starting not to see that very often anymore.
Yeah, it's nice when you still do.
Yeah.
Love copper. All right, so we're going to start right in where the water starts. So this is the res valve insert. So the valve to your reservoir sits right inside here. On here you will see a couple wires coming off of this cup here. This green striped one and the white one. This is what actually senses the water inside of here. The mineral content in the water conducts the electricity between these 2 points, completing the circuit and saying, hey, I got water.
Yay.
So if you ever have an issue where your machine is not sensing the water, you want to check and make sure that these are all connected and everything's cleaned out, not covered in scale or anything else in there. You'll also see on this cup we have 3 tubes coming off here. A lot of times we're used to seeing 1 or 2, so I'll tell you about this third one. We're going to start at the top here. You'll see this tube goes up to there, open to atmosphere. So what's going on here is when you're putting your reservoir in, this is actually pushing, it'll have a little bit of water that's going to come out this way, but it's actually just kind of breaking the vacuum in there. So it's going to push air out first, almost like a deaerator.
So you can get your reservoir in there, right?
Yep,
Otherwise,
exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, otherwise you're going to be pushing pretty hard.
Okay.
So it gives you a little fight. Something to keep in mind if you do ever have to take this off for any reason is, if you can see this little ball in here. So what happens is that ball, when the water gets in there, it floats up and it actually stops. There's a little stopper in there. That's what will keep the water from blurbing out too much or pouring out if you overfilled it. Which is another thing that's important to note is if you look at your actual reservoir, it has this max fill line. You want to pay attention to that because if you go over that max fill line, you can end up getting a lot more water coming out of here. And you'll end up with a big old pool at the bottom. Good thing to try and avoid.
Yeah.
So pay attention to that max fill line. Okay, come down to our middle line right here. You'll see that comes out, hits a little plastic T right here. So this is a return line. This is your OPV and a deaerator. So water comes back through the tube and into the cup from that line. Okay, and I'll talk more about those components as we go through the actual system here.
Okay.
On the bottom here, this is the actual intake line. So this goes from the cup down this line here. You'll see halfway through our journey, there's this little plastic contraption here. This is a little inline filter. So you can actually take that apart and clean out the screen on it if you get a lot of buildup, or just blow it out. You can even throw it in a little descale if you had a bunch of calcium chunks or something in there. One of the more common things that we'll see inside there is actually little loose pieces of grounds. You know, you're grinding your coffee and everything, you get those little flakes. Sometimes you forgot to put your lid on your reservoir, gets in there. That does a great job at collecting it so that you don't get it traveling further down into your system.
You already got your coffee down the other end of the line. You don't want to
Exactly.
Yeah.
This could be over-extracted at that point, that's for sure. So after we get off of that filter there, we're going to come down to this little elbow connecting to your vibratory pump. This vibratory pump does have a little limit in here that if this were to overheat, that limit will go is not resettable, so if that ever happens, you would have to replace that limit, but at least you can sleep well at night knowing that it didn't fry your entire pump. So if you're ever having an issue with your pump, that's a good place to test first, is to make sure that you have conductivity between here and here. If you do, then this isn't tripped and there's something wrong with your pump or somewhere else in the system. But if you test those two spots and you don't have conductivity, then you can try just replacing that first and see if it gets you up and running.
Okay.
So after we come out of the vibratory pump, as I mentioned before, you have this fitting right here. It's a Deaearator. Just helps remove some of the air from the system. It's all water, no air. I mean, why do you want air in there? So that would travel back into the tea and into the cup. So water comes off the Deaearator to a little elbow, up that elbow into this braided hose line. This braided hose line comes down to another elbow. Got a lot of elbows and tees in here.
A lot of elbows.
Follow my bouncing ball, all right?
Okay.
All right, so off that elbow, we come to another tee. So we're going to start off talking about the fill for the steam boiler. So that's going to go this way. It stopped right here at the fill solenoid. Now, if you see,
So there's
okay,
a
from
solenoid
there,
over there.
Yep, there's your solenoid. Looks a little bit different than some. It has this cap for the electrical connections, which is really nice because make sure that if you ever have to take things apart, that all your wiring is correct and it seals against moisture, which is really nice because your connections are facing up right below a boiler with areas that could potentially at some point in the lifetime leak. So if it leaks down on here, that gives a lot of extra protection for it. So if you ever needed to do any work on it, there's just a Phillips head screw at the top that you would undo. That cap comes off. Then everything else is the same on most solenoids. You got like usually a 14 millimeter nut on the front there. Take off the pack, unscrew the whole solenoid valve, whatever you need to do to get in there.
Okay.
Okay. After the solenoid, common trend with these is there's a non-return valve right after it. Okay. Non-return valve, water goes one way but not the other. So if you ever have some water sneaking back into this solenoid here, you have an issue right there. Off the non-return valve, you're going to come up to this copper line right here that goes into the boiler and fills the boiler up. Okay, I'll give you a little bit more detail on how all that magic occurs once we get to the top of the boiler.
Okay.
All right, so now we'll travel back through our system, which the water won't do unless there's something wrong. Back to this little intersection T right here. If we go this way, we're going into the hydraulics for the group head, thermal siphon heat exchanger. So first off is another non-return valve. After the non-return valve, we have another T. This is your expansion valve. Think of it the maximum capacity of the pressure inside your heat exchanger system. So whatever you have that set to is how high the pressure can ultimately go.
Okay.
Okay. That is adjustable by turning this bolt right here. If you're ever going to do that, just be careful because you can start turning this whole part with it. So just make sure that as you're twisting it, that you're adjusting this little rubber elbow. That just slides on and off. Also make sure that when you're putting it back together that it's seated really well so you don't have water dribbling out. It's not going to have a lot of force behind it when it comes out, but you just want to make sure it's not half off. Otherwise, all that excess water when you're expanding is going to end up in the bottom of your machine. But typically what I do is I'll take it off, make my adjustment, put it back on.
Okay.
That way you're not twisting anything, because when you twist it, you run the risk of damaging the elbow, taking one of these lines off, damaging that T, so just be careful with that. All right, so off this end of the T, come up to this line to the lower end of our heat exchanger. So your water will come up into the heat exchanger where there's the nice tube going through the center there. So you have, this is the low end, it's cooler water. Water comes up through the tube here to the high end. This is the hot water. Remember, cooler, not cool.
Yeah.
So what's happening is the water is running through the system. As it gets cool at the group head, it will go down through the system and recirculate through, keeping temperature stability.
So it's just got that constant circulation driven by convection, basically.
Exactly.
Okay.
See, I trained you. Coming to work in my shop soon,
Yeah.
right? Perfect.
Absolutely.
All right. So that's the hydraulics. Oh, I don't think I mentioned the. No. Oh, never mind.
Okay.
Ignore me. Doing this on the fly is not always simple, so
Yeah.
be patient. So we're going to move on to the top of the boiler here. A couple of the electronic connections you see up here. First of all, you have your high limits. You have one for your neutral and one for your load. If you're ever not heating, real quick and easy thing to check is see if these are tripped. Simple push, see if it clicks.
They're like circuit breakers, they're resettable.
Exactly, yep.
Yeah.
And these are thermal, so it's based on if this were to start overheating, this boiler starts overheating is when it would trip one of these. It is possible for them to just fail over time. Not as common, usually there is an underlying reason, but you know, if you give it a test, if you do ever have to reset one of these limits, I always suggest keeping an eye on the machine. Don't let the machine stay idle without you around until you've had a chance to like kind of make sure everything's working fine for at least a few days.
Okay.
You come over onto this side here. This is your pressure switch, Pressurestat. Looks a little bit different than some of the other ones that other manufacturers have. So just want to let everyone know that is what that is.
It's measuring the pressure in the boiler, correct?
Yep.
It's just gonna, yeah.
So if we follow that tube, whoop, isn't that fun?
Loop-de-loop.
Look at that, little
Yeah,
loop-de-loop. So that comes to a little T right here. Well, that little, that one's kind of big actually. So off the top end here, you got this other line that comes off. This, which almost looks like an expansion valve. This is actually your safety valve. It's a safety valve, and so basically, if your boiler were to overheat, go over the set pressure on that, it will blow out that pressure through that little tube there, and this little tube, if you can see, straight down in there goes to another little boot. There's a white boot there that it connects to, and that would come out the front of your machine there.
Right,
Yep.
that little button in the center. Okay.
Okay. So back up here, we've got this fitting right here to a little capillary. You can follow that capillary down, down, down. Goes all the way to the front of the machine right there. That is your steam pressure gauge. Okay. Now, keep in mind, this machine does not have a brew pressure gauge, so the only pressure you're ever going to read is what's in the service boiler, not what's at your group head or in your heat exchanger. So if you ever wanted to adjust your brew pressure on this, you would need a portafilter that actually has a gauge built into it.
And then you'd adjust that OPV down there, right? For
Exactly,
that.
yep.
Okay.
Okay,
Not
so
the one up there.
No, no.
Yeah.
Don't touch that.
That's not going to do anything.
Yeah, I never recommend servicing these yourself. If there's something wrong with it, just replace it.
Okay.
Because, you know, when the word safety is in its name,
Yeah.
better safe
Don't
than
mess
sorry.
around.
Exactly. Right here we have the vacuum relief, anti-suction, non-suction, however you want to call it. Basically, as the boiler is heating up, it is releasing some pressure. As that pressure builds, this will pop up all the way. So this is a pretty simple mechanism. It's just a little piston with a O-ring around it and a little clip holding it in place. Pretty easy to service. We'll be having a video on that shortly. Come over to here. Oh, I will actually point out with the vacuum relief, when you're first heating your machine up, there we go, words. If you hear a little bit of hissing and a little bit of steam coming from the top of the machine, that's this doing its job. You're totally fine. If it continues doing that for like, 10 minutes after your machine's heated up, that may need to be cleaned or replaced, but it's completely normal to hear that hissing during the normal startup operation.
Sure. Okay.
We come over to here, we get this red wire coming off. This is your liquid level probe. So that just is a piece of metal that goes straight down into the boiler. And as we said, how this contraption works on the water sensor for the cup, it's the same idea up here. As the water fills in the boiler and comes up, it will hit that piece of metal that comes down is probably about right around there, I'd say.
So your
Although
boiler's
it's at a
got
slight angle, but
full of water up to there, wherever it hits that probe, right? And
yep.
Yeah.
And then it goes, so it connects from there, this boiler being the ground point, so ground wire there you don't need because you have a grounded boiler. So it is its own wire. It goes through other wires to the board to communicate that. And then through this red wire down to the board. So if your boiler, if you feel like it's not filling when it should be, you could always just pop that off, and if it starts trying to fill, then you know your liquid level control circuit is actually working right.
Okay.
Okay. Let's see, what else do we got here? We've got some really simple stuff here. We got our main power switch and our green light indicator. Green light comes on indicating there's power. It will flash if either the fill mode has timed out, which you can check by turning it off, turning it back on. If it goes back to solid and continues filling, you know that's what happened. If it's blinking nonstop, even with resetting it, then it means that it's not sensing the water in here for some reason.
Okay.
Okay. So there's some simple switches there. We've got, back over to this side, we've got your heating element. Heating element comes off of your thermostats here. This thermostat comes off of your Pressurestat. So power comes in, comes out of here when it's calling for it, goes through there, down to the element. This is your main power control board. It's usually not that loose, I just loosened it. You know that, you saw that. So these are all your connections right in here. Pretty simple. Got this one main green connector here, so all the power coming in, and then all these little ones off the bottom here are basically all the controls. This is where it spits out the juice to power all the components.
Okay.
Okay. With that out of the way, we can see there's this other little switch down here. Interesting. This is one of those ones that sneaks by. People don't know about this guy.
Little
So
switch.
see this little green switch down here? That is your eco mode. Press in on that, it will turn the machine into eco mode, and excuse me. It's the time frame on that?
90 minutes.
90 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah. No action for 90 minutes and.
Yep. And then it will put your machine into a standby mode. You can reset that standby mode by either lifting the lever or power cycling the machine.
Okay.
Okay. This is the backside of your pressure gauge, which again is reading just the steam pressure, not your brew pressure. And this is your brew switch. This is when you lift your brew lever, it pushes in on this little tab here, which switches a micro switch in there, which relays the information to your board to turn on your pump.
Okay.
Okay. And other than that, we got two more lines coming off. We got the one down at the bottom here, comes all the way up to your hot water tap. Then we have off this other big T over here from the vacuum, we have your steam. So it goes right up to your steam valve. And I think that that is about it. There's not too horribly much to this machine. Packs a lot in a little, so.
It's a pretty straightforward, simple heat exchange machine with the copper boiler.
Yeah, that's one of the nice things about these machines is when they're built nice and simple, beautiful machine, lots of copper, which everyone knows I love. But yeah, it doesn't take much to get her going.
All right, Brian, thanks for taking us on a tour of the Rocket Appartamento.
My pleasure.